one lasted 4 seconds. It's nothing special, just a little bracelet. You know how Julian likes to show off. I walked over to the dresser, set down my mug, and pulled open the drawer. Alma didn't stop me, which told me she'd already calculated that resistance would look worse than compliance. Smart woman, my wife. Too smart for her own good sometimes. The box was heavier than expected, crafted from real wood with brass corners. I opened it slowly, savoring the moment. Inside, nestled in cream silk, lay a platinum tennis bracelet that probably cost more than my car payment. The diamonds caught the morning light and threw tiny rainbows across our bedroom wall. But it wasn't the bracelet that interested me. It was the engraving on the inside of the box lid. To my darling V, with all my love, J. I looked at my wife. She was biting her lower lip, a tell I'd learned to recognize during our courtship. Back then, I'd found it endearing. Now, it just made me tired. V? I asked. What? The engraving says, to my darling V. Your name starts with A. Alma's face went through a fascinating series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, then a forced laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Oh, that's weird. Maybe the jewelry store made a mistake? You know how these custom orders get mixed up. I nodded thoughtfully, closed the box with a gentle snap, and handed it back to her. I understand, I said. Relief flooded her features. She probably thought she'd dodged a bullet. Poor Alma. If that was her poker face, we were about to go bankrupt. Thanks for being so understanding, honey. I know it looks strange, but no need to explain. I picked up my coffee and headed for the door. I trust you completely. That last part was true, in a way. I trusted her completely. To be exactly who she was. I spent the rest of that morning at my home office, ostensibly working on a security audit for a local bank. But my mind kept drifting to that jewelry box, to the careful way Alma had constructed her lie, to the relief in her eyes when she thought I'd bought it. The smart play would have been to confront her immediately, demand the truth, schedule couples therapy, maybe suggest a trial separation. That's what the marriage counselors recommend. Communication, they call it. Healthy boundaries. But I'd never been particularly interested in healthy boundaries. Instead, I opened my laptop and got to work. The first thing I did was check our joint credit card statements. Nothing unusual there. Alma was too smart to leave an obvious trail. But I'd been managing our finances for years, and I knew her spending patterns better than she did. 3 charges stood out: a hotel restaurant in the business district, a parking garage downtown, and a florist I'd never heard of, all on days when she'd claimed to be working late. Next, I pulled up the backup of her phone. Alma didn't know I'd set up automatic cloud backups for both our devices after her phone got stolen last year. The backup included text messages, call logs, and app data going back 6 months. I made a fresh pot of coffee and settled in for some light reading. The messages started 3 months ago. Innocent enough at first, Julian reaching out to congratulate her on the promotion, Alma responding politely. But the tone shifted quickly. Within 2 weeks, they were exchanging photos. Within a month, they were making plans. Julian. Can't stop thinking about last night. Alma. I know we shouldn't, but... Julian. Leave him. We could be so good together. Alma. It's complicated. The house, the finances, and Corbin handles everything. Julian. I'll take care of you. You know I can. I had to admire Julian's confidence. Taking care of my wife would require more than his trust fund could handle. Alma had expensive tastes and zero impulse control. She'd burned through his inheritance in 5 years, maybe 3. But the real treasure trove wasn't in the text messages. It was in her banking app. Alma had opened a separate account 2 months ago. She'd been skimming money from our joint checking, small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. 500 here, 300 there. Nothing that would bankrupt us, but enough to fund her little adventure. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts for Julian. She'd even bought him a watch. a Rolex Submariner that cost more than some people's cars. The receipt was right there in her email, along with the gift message, for all the time we'll have together. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. 8 years of marriage, and my wife was planning to leave me for a man who probably couldn't balance his own checkbook. She was stealing from our joint account to buy gifts for her lover, lying to my face with the confidence of a seasoned politician, and apparently convinced that I was too stupid to notice. The rational response would be hurt, betrayal, maybe some righteous anger. Instead, I felt something much more dangerous: curiosity. I wanted to see how far she'd go, how elaborate the deception would become, whether Julian was as clever as he thought he was, or just another rich boy who'd never faced real consequences. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Most of all, I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized they'd been playing chess with someone who'd already won. I closed the laptop and went to make lunch. Alma would be home soon, probably with some story about her busy morning at the agency. She'd kiss my cheek, ask about my day, and pretend that everything was normal. And I'd pretend right back. For now. The knock came at exactly 9:30 the next morning, sharp and authoritative. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Alma had already left for work, humming some pop song while she gathered her things. She'd seemed particularly cheerful, probably planning another rendezvous with Julian. I opened the front door to find a woman I'd never seen before, though something about her seemed familiar. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and the kind of posture that suggested military training or expensive private schools. Her clothes were understated but clearly expensive. A charcoal wool coat, leather gloves, boots that probably cost more than most people's rent. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. They were the color of winter sky, and they held the kind of focused intensity I'd seen in corporate boardrooms just before someone got terminated. "Corbin Findler?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Vanna Heslor. Your wife has something that belongs to me." The last name clicked into place. Heslor, as in Mrs. Julian Heslor. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. She studied my face for a moment, probably trying to determine whether I was an ally, an enemy, or just another casualty. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded and stepped inside. I led her to the living room, the same space where Alma and I used to host dinner parties and game nights, back when we still pretended to enjoy each other's company. "Coffee?" I offered. "No, thank you." She settled into the armchair across from our couch, crossing her legs with military precision. "I assume you know why I'm here." "I have a pretty good idea." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. She set it on the coffee table between us like a chess player making an opening move. "My husband thinks he's clever," she said. "He's been very careful about covering his tracks. Different credit cards, cash transactions, burner phones. He even bought a separate laptop for his correspondence." Sounds like he put some thought into it. He did. Unfortunately for him, I put more thought into catching him. She opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. Bank statements, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, parking garage tickets. But the real centerpiece was a stack of printed text messages and emails, each one more incriminating than the last. "Your wife is quite the romantic," Vanna continued, her voice as flat as a tax document. "Listen to this one. Julian, darling, I can't wait to start our new life together. Just thinking about it makes my heart race." I picked up one of the photos. It showed Alma and Julian entering the lobby of the Meridian Hotel, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing at some private joke. "How long have you known?" I asked. 3 months. I hired a private investigator after Julian started working late every Tuesday and Thursday. Amazing how creatures of habit they become, isn't it? I studied the woman across from me. There was something almost surgical about her composure, as if she'd carefully excised every trace of emotion and replaced it with pure calculation. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "I want them to pay, both of them. Not just financially, though that's part of it. I want them humiliated. I want them to understand that actions have consequences, and that some people are smarter than they think they are." She leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw something human flicker behind those winter eyes, something that might have been pain or rage or both. "My husband thinks I'm just another pretty accessory, someone to look good at charity galas and corporate events. Your wife probably thinks you're a harmless tech nerd who won't cause trouble. They're both wrong, aren't they?" I set down the photograph and really looked at Vanna Heslor. She wasn't just angry, she was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that came from being underestimated your entire life and finally deciding to do something about it. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. She smiled then, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. Not because it was cruel, but because it was genuinely happy. "I'm so glad you asked." We spent the next hour going through her files. Vanna had been thorough, obsessively so. She had financial records showing Julian's spending patterns, photographs documenting every meeting, even recordings of phone conversations. Apparently, Julian wasn't as careful about operational security as he thought, but more importantly, she had information about Alma that I'd never suspected. "Your wife has been planning this for longer than you think," Vanna said, sliding another document across the table. "Look at this." It was a consultation agreement with a divorce attorney, dated 6 weeks ago. Alma had been getting legal advice about asset division, spousal support, and something called strategic positioning. "She's been building a case," Vanna continued, "documenting your work hours, your travel schedule, anything that could be used to paint you as an absent or neglectful husband. She's even been talking to your neighbors." I thought about Mrs. Chen next door, who'd been asking unusually pointed questions about my schedule lately, and Dave from across the street, who'd made some comment about seeing me leave early in the mornings. "She's smart," I admitted. "She is, but she made one crucial mistake." "Which is?" "She assumed you'd react predictably, file for divorce, fight over assets, maybe try to win her back. She's prepared for all of those responses." Vanna gathered the papers back into her folder, her movements precise and economical. "But she's not prepared for us to work together. She doesn't know that I exist, and she certainly doesn't know what I'm capable of." I studied this strange, dangerous woman who'd appeared at my door like some kind of avenging angel. There was something liberating about her presence, about the way she talked about revenge as if it were just another business transaction. "What's your background?" I asked. "Corporate restructuring. I specialize in hostile takeovers." That explained a lot. "And your husband doesn't know about your professional skills?" "Julian thinks I inherited my money. He's never bothered to ask where it actually came from." She stood up, smoothing her coat. "Men like Julian and women like your wife share a common weakness. They think everyone else is playing by the same rules they are." She handed me a business card. It was simple, elegant, with just her name and a phone number. "Think about it," she said. "But don't think too long. They're planning something for next weekend. A romantic getaway to celebrate your wife's upcoming freedom." After she left, I sat in my living room staring at the business card. Vanna Heslor. No title, no company name, just a name and a number. Like a calling card for a very exclusive service. I thought about Alma, probably sitting in her office right now, planning her exit strategy. I thought about Julian, counting his money and congratulating himself on stealing another man's wife. I thought about the 8 years Alma and I had spent building a life together, and how easily she was prepared to throw it all away. Then I thought about the look on Vanna's face when she'd smiled. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. I'm in, I said when she answered. I was hoping you'd say that. We have a lot of work to do. The first rule of corporate espionage, Vanna explained over coffee the next morning, is that information is only valuable if you use it strategically. The second rule is that timing is everything. The third rule is that your opponents should never see you coming until it's too late to matter. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where business deals get made over artisanal pastries and overpriced lattes. Vanna had chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances, another habit from her corporate raider days, I assumed. The key, she said, spreading a legal pad across the table, is to let them make the first move while we control the board. They think they're executing a plan, but we're actually orchestrating their destruction. She'd drawn a flowchart showing the connections between Alma, Julian, their various accounts, and what she called pressure points. Places where we could apply leverage to maximum effect. Your wife's weakness is financial security, she continued. She's never had to actually earn her own money. She went from her parents' support to your joint accounts. The thought of being truly independent terrifies her, which is why she's jumping to Julian. And Julian's weakness? His ego. He's never failed at anything that mattered to him, never faced real consequences. He thinks he's untouchable. I studied the chart. It was elegant in its simplicity, like a well-designed security system, every vulnerability mapped, every attack vector identified. So what's our first move? Vanna smiled that terrifying smile again. We're going to give them exactly what they want, and then we're going to make them regret ever wanting it. Phase 1 began that afternoon. I spent my lunch break at the bank, transferring all of our joint assets into a trust fund I'd established under my brother Darren's name. Perfectly legal, since I was the primary account holder and had power of attorney for all our financial decisions. Alma had signed those papers years ago without reading them, trusting me to handle the boring details of our life together. The trust was structured so that Alma could access household funds for normal expenses, but any large withdrawals or transfers required both my signature and Darren's approval. It would take her lawyers weeks to unravel, assuming they could unravel it at all. While I was restructuring our finances, Vanna was making her own moves. She'd hired a moving company to pack Alma's belongings, just her personal items, nothing that could be considered joint property. The boxes would be delivered to Alma's office the next morning, with a note explaining that I was giving her space to figure things out. The beauty of this approach, Vanna explained when we met that evening, is that we're not actually doing anything wrong. You're protecting your assets, which any divorce attorney would recommend. I'm simply helping my husband's mistress relocate, which could be seen as remarkably generous. We were sitting in my kitchen, planning the next phase over takeout Chinese food. It felt surprisingly domestic, like we were an old married couple discussing our day. Except our day involved financial warfare and psychological manipulation. What about Julian? I asked. Julian is going to have a very interesting week. I've arranged for his car to be towed from his usual parking spot. Apparently he's been parking in a space reserved for disabled drivers. The fine is substantial, and the impound fees accumulate daily. She opened her laptop and showed me a series of photographs. Julian's silver BMW being hooked up to a tow truck, Julian standing on the sidewalk, looking confused and angry. I may have also submitted an anonymous tip to his company's ethics committee about his use of corporate resources for personal matters, hotel charges on the company credit card, that sort of thing. Is that true? Oh yes. Your wife has expensive tastes, and Julian has been using his corporate account to pay for them. His company takes a very dim view of that sort of thing. I had to admire her thoroughness. While I'd been focused on the emotional betrayal, Vanna had been building a comprehensive case for their professional destruction. There's one more thing, she said, pulling out another folder. I need you to install some software on your home computer. The software, she explained, would monitor all network traffic and automatically back up any data from devices connected to our Wi-Fi. Since Alma often worked from home, this would give us access to her professional correspondence as well as her personal communications. "Is this legal?" I asked. "It's your network, your house, and your computer. You have every right to monitor your own systems for security purposes." The distinction felt thin, but I installed the software anyway. At this point, I was committed to seeing how far this would go. Alma came home that evening in an unusually good mood. She kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and made dinner while humming that same pop song from the morning. She seemed lighter somehow, as if she'd made some important decision and felt relief at having chosen a path forward. "How was work?" I asked over dinner. "Busy. We're launching a new campaign next month, so everyone's stressed. But good stress, you know. The kind that means we're doing something important." She was lying, of course. According to the monitoring software, she'd spent most of the day exchanging messages with Julian and researching apartments in his neighborhood. But I nodded and made appropriate, supportive noises. "Any exciting weekend plans?" I asked. "Just the usual. Maybe some shopping, catch up on reading. You?" "Probably work on that security audit. Pretty boring stuff." After dinner, she disappeared upstairs to take a bath and relax. I knew she was actually video chatting with Julian, planning their romantic getaway for the following weekend. The software had already captured their hotel reservation confirmations. I spent the evening in my office, reviewing the intelligence Vanna had gathered and planning our next moves. It was like working on a particularly complex security assessment, except the vulnerabilities I was mapping belonged to real people who'd made the mistake of underestimating me. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanna. "Phase 1 complete. They have no idea what's coming." I looked up at the ceiling, where I could hear Alma moving around in our bedroom, probably getting ready for another restful night's sleep. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow they'd start to understand that their careful plans had been built on a foundation of sand, and we were about to pull out all the supporting pillars at once. I turned off my computer and headed upstairs. Alma was already asleep or pretending to be. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and slipped into bed beside the woman I'd shared a life with for 8 years. In the morning, her world would start falling apart. I found myself looking forward to it. Alma's scream woke me at 7:15 the next morning. I found her in the kitchen, standing in her bathrobe, staring at her phone with the expression of someone who'd just watched their house burn down. On the counter beside her sat a stack of moving boxes, each one neatly labeled with her name and our address. "Corbin," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "There are boxes here, with my things." I poured myself coffee and examined the delivery receipt. "Looks like they came early this morning. Did you order something?" "I didn't order anything. These are my clothes, my books, my jewelry. Someone packed up my belongings and had them delivered here." I opened one of the boxes and peered inside. Whoever had done the packing had been meticulous, everything folded, wrapped, and organized with professional care. "Huh," I said. "That's weird." Alma's phone rang. She answered it with shaking hands. "Hello? Yes, this is Alma Findler. What do you mean frozen? I need to access my account right now." I sipped my coffee and watched her face cycle through confusion, anger, and growing desperation. "What do you mean trust fund? I never authorized any trust fund. This is my money." The conversation lasted 15 minutes. By the end of it, Alma had learned that all of our joint assets had been moved into an irrevocable trust, that she had no legal claim to the funds without my consent, and that the earliest she could speak to a lawyer about it would be Monday morning. She hung up and turned to me with wild eyes. "Did you do this?" "Do what?" "Move our money, pack my things, whatever game you're playing." I set down my coffee cup and looked at her with what I hoped was genuine confusion. "Alma, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would I pack your things? And the money? I move some assets around for tax purposes, but that's just standard financial planning." "Tax purposes?" The trust provides better protection and some advantages for estate planning. I mentioned it to you last month, remember? You said to handle whatever needed to be handled. I could see her trying to remember the conversation. It had happened, sort of. I'd mentioned something about financial planning while she was distracted by her phone, probably texting Julian. She'd waved me off with a vague, whatever you think is best. I need access to our accounts, she said. Of course, you can access the household account anytime. For larger amounts, we just need to coordinate with Darren since he's the trustee. Darren? Your brother Darren? He's a financial planner. It made sense to have a professional managing things. Alma stared at me for a long moment, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to figure out whether this was coincidence, incompetence, or something more deliberate. But she couldn't accuse me of anything without revealing why she needed large amounts of money immediately. Her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and her face went pale. I need to go to work, she said. Everything okay? Fine. Everything's fine. But everything was not fine, as I learned from monitoring her messages throughout the day. Julian's car had been impounded, his corporate credit card had been suspended pending an ethics investigation, and his wife had apparently hired a team of lawyers to freeze his personal accounts. Meanwhile, Alma was discovering that her carefully planned exit strategy had some unexpected complications. The apartment she'd planned to rent required first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, money she couldn't access without going through the trust. The credit cards she'd applied for in her own name had been declined due to insufficient independent income history. Most importantly, Julian was starting to panic. This can't be coincidence, he texted her. Someone knows about us. Don't be paranoid, she replied. These things happen. All at once, my car, my accounts, the ethics complaint, someone is targeting us. I had to give Julian credit for pattern recognition, even if he was too late to do anything about it. The real entertainment began that afternoon when Alma tried to access her secret account, the one she'd been using to fund her affair. According to the monitoring software, she'd attempted to log in 17 times before calling the bank. The account had been frozen due to suspicious activity. Specifically, someone had reported that the account might be connected to identity theft, since the spending patterns didn't match the account holder's known financial profile. That someone had been Vanna, of course. She'd provided the bank with documentation showing that the account had been funded through transfers from joint marital assets, which raised questions about whether Alma had proper authorization for those transfers. By evening, Alma was in full crisis mode. She came home looking like she'd aged 5 years in one day, her usual composure completely shattered. We need to talk, she said. We sat in the living room, the same space where Vanna had laid out her evidence just 2 days earlier. Alma perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to bolt at any moment. I think someone is trying to sabotage me, she said. Sabotage you how? My accounts, my work, everything. It's like someone has been watching me, planning this. She wasn't wrong, of course. Someone had been watching her, and someone had been planning this. Multiple someones, actually. That sounds paranoid, I said gently. Maybe you're just having a run of bad luck. Bad luck doesn't freeze bank accounts, Corbin. Bad luck doesn't pack up your belongings and deliver them like a threat. I leaned forward, projecting concern and confusion in equal measure. Alma, you're scaring me. Why would anyone want to sabotage you? And why would they pack your things? That doesn't make sense unless... I let the sentence hang in the air, waiting for her to fill in the blank. Unless what? Unless they thought you were leaving. Like, if someone wanted to help you leave, they might pack your things. But why would anyone think you were leaving? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If she denied planning to leave, she'd have to explain why someone would think otherwise. If she admitted to planning to leave, she'd have to explain why. Alma chose a third option: deflection. I don't know what's happening, she said, but I'm scared. Can you help me figure this out? Looking at her sitting there, genuinely frightened and confused. I felt something that might have been sympathy. She was in over her head, caught between her own deception and forces she didn't understand. But then, I remembered the jewelry box, the secret account, the months of lies and careful manipulation. I remembered her laughing with Julian in those photographs, planning their future together while systematically dismantling ours. "Of course I'll help," I said. "We're a team, right? We'll figure this out together." The relief on her face was almost heartbreaking. Almost. The weekend brought new revelations and fresh chaos. Saturday morning, I woke to find Alma already dressed and pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone in the urgent, hushed tones people use when they're trying to solve a crisis without waking the neighbors. "No, I can't meet you there," she was saying. "I told you, my accounts are frozen. I can't even pay for parking right now." Julian, I assumed, having his own financial difficulties. After she hung up, I made pancakes and coffee while she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone like it might spontaneously generate solutions to her problems. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting a plate in front of her. "Just work stuff. The new campaign has everyone stressed." Another lie, but a predictable one. Alma had been using work as cover for her affair for months. She probably thought it was the perfect alibi since I never paid much attention to the details of her marketing projects. What she didn't know was that I'd been monitoring her work email since installing Vanna's software. There was no new campaign. In fact, Alma's professional life was about to become much more complicated. "I might go into the office for a few hours," she said, picking at her pancakes. "Catch up on some things." "On Saturday?" "You know how it is. The creative process doesn't follow a schedule." I nodded sympathetically. "Want me to drive you? I could pick up groceries while you work." No thanks. I might be there for a while and I don't want you waiting around." After she left, I called Vanna. "Phase 2? She asked without preamble. "Phase 2. We met at a coffee shop near Alma's office building. Through the window, we could see her car in the parking garage across the street. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, probably trying to figure out how to meet Julian without any accessible funds. "Her credit cards were declined this morning," Vanna reported. "Julian's wife has frozen all his accounts pending the divorce proceedings. They're both essentially penniless until this gets sorted out." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, if they're lucky. Months, more likely. Julian's wife is being very thorough." I watched Alma finally get out of her car and walk toward the office building. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone. "What's next?" I asked. Vanna opened her laptop and showed me a series of documents. "Julian's ethics hearing is Monday morning. I've provided them with some additional evidence. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even the receipt for that watch your wife bought him." "They'll fire him?" "Almost certainly. Corporate ethics violations are taken very seriously, especially when they involve company funds and potential conflicts of interest." The laptop screen showed Julian's company directory page, complete with his professional headshot and biography. He looked confident, successful, completely unaware that his career was about to implode. "And Alma?" "That's where things get interesting." Vanna pulled up another document, an email thread between Alma and someone named Nadine Walsh, who apparently worked in HR at Alma's agency. "Your wife has been sharing confidential client information with her friend Nadine. Nothing illegal, but definitely against company policy. She's also been using company resources for personal projects." I read through the emails. Alma had been asking Nadine to run background checks on divorce attorneys, research asset protection strategies, even help her set up that secret bank account, all using the agency's resources and databases. "How did you get these?" "Nadine is remarkably careless with her password security, and she logs into her work email from her personal devices, which makes everything much easier to access." I stared at Vanna with something approaching awe. You're terrifying. Thank you. I consider that a compliment. We spent the next hour reviewing the evidence she'd compiled. It was comprehensive, devastating, and completely legal. Every document had been obtained through legitimate means, every piece of information verified through multiple sources. The beauty of this approach, Vanna explained, is that we're not actually attacking them. We're simply making sure that their own actions have appropriate consequences. And after they're both fired, then they'll be unemployed, financially ruined, and completely dependent on each other, which should be interesting, since neither of them has ever faced real adversity before. I thought about Alma and Julian, probably sitting in her office right now, trying to figure out how to salvage their romantic getaway with no money and no prospects. It would be almost funny if it weren't so pathetic. There's one more thing, Vanna said. She pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the table between us. I think you should see this. Inside the envelope were photographs, Alma and Julian, but not the hotel lobby shots I'd seen before. These were taken in my house, my kitchen, my living room, my bedroom. When? I asked. Last Tuesday, while you were at that client meeting in Boston. I studied the images. Julian lounging on my couch, drinking from my coffee mugs, using my bathroom. Alma giving him a tour of our home like she was already planning to sell it. They're getting careless, Vanna observed. Overconfident. That's when people make their biggest mistakes. I put the photographs back in the envelope. Something cold and sharp had settled in my chest, and I realized that whatever sympathy I'd felt for Alma the night before had completely evaporated. How do you want to handle Monday? I asked. Leave that to me. I'll make sure the right people get the right information at the right time. Your job is to be the concerned, supportive husband who has no idea what's happening. And after that? Vanna's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. After that, we see how they handle being ordinary people with ordinary problems and no one to blame but themselves. I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, thinking about consequences and choices and the way people reveal their true character when they think no one is watching. Alma's car was already in the driveway when I arrived, which meant her crisis meeting with Julian had been shorter than expected. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine and a book she wasn't actually reading. How was the office? I asked. Productive. Got a lot done. Good. I picked up groceries and started dinner. Thai curry okay? Perfect. We spent the evening like a normal couple. We cooked together, watched a movie, discussed plans for the upcoming week. Alma seemed calmer, more like her old self. Maybe she'd decided to abandon her plans with Julian. Maybe she'd realized what she was about to give up. Or maybe she was just a better actress than I'd given her credit for. As we got ready for bed, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Corbin, I love you. You know that, right? Of course. I love you too. She kissed me goodnight, and for a moment, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. If there was still time to stop this before it went too far. Then I remembered the photographs of Julian in our bedroom, and the feeling passed. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Monday morning was going to be very interesting indeed. Monday arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling weather that makes everyone want to stay in bed. Alma left early for work, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with a potential client. I knew from her text messages that she was actually meeting Julian at a diner across town, trying to figure out their next move. I spent the morning working from home, monitoring the various feeds and alerts Vanna had set up. It was like watching a demolition in slow motion. You knew the building was coming down, but the precise moment of collapse was still a surprise. The first domino fell at 10:30. Julian's ethics hearing lasted exactly 47 minutes. According to Vanna's contact in the company's legal department, Julian had tried to explain away the charges as a misunderstanding. then blame his assistant for the booking errors, and finally claim that the whole thing was a setup by his wife. None of these defenses were particularly effective when confronted with receipts, credit card statements, and hotel security footage. Julian was terminated immediately. Security escorted him from the building with a box of personal belongings and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent him from discussing the circumstances of his departure. The second domino fell an hour later. Alma's agency received an anonymous tip about potential misuse of company resources. The tip included detailed documentation of Alma's use of company databases for personal research, her sharing of confidential client information, and her collaboration with Nadine Walsh on non-business activities. The investigation took most of the afternoon, but the outcome was inevitable. Both Alma and Nadine were suspended pending a full review of their activities. By 3 o'clock, both halves of the affair had been professionally neutralized. I was making coffee when Alma came home. She looked like she'd been hit by a truck, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, clothes wrinkled from a day of crisis meetings and damage control. "They suspended me," she said without preamble. "What? Why?" "Someone reported me for misusing company resources. They said I was doing personal research on company time, sharing confidential information." She collapsed onto the couch. "It's all lies, but they have documentation, emails, database searches, everything." I sat down beside her, projecting appropriate shock and concern. "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know, but someone has been watching me, documenting everything. This isn't random, Corbin. Someone is trying to destroy my life." She wasn't wrong, of course. Someone was trying to destroy her life. Several someones, actually, and they were doing an excellent job of it. "What did Nadine say?" "Nadine?" Alma's face went pale. "How do you know about Nadine?" "You mentioned her before. Your friend in HR?" "Oh, right. She was suspended too. They think we were working together on something." Alma's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, and her face somehow managed to get even paler. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing. Just work stuff." But I could see enough of the screen to know it wasn't work stuff. It was Julian, and the message was short and devastating. "They fired me. We need to talk." "Alma," I said gently, "you're scaring me. What's really going on?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide how much to tell me. How much she could tell me without revealing the whole truth. "Someone is targeting me," she said finally. "I don't know who or why, but they're trying to ruin my life, my job, my finances, everything." "Have you done anything that someone might want revenge for?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Alma's eyes darted away from mine, then back again. "No, I mean, nothing that would justify this. Everyone makes enemies in business, but this is different. This is personal." I reached over and took her hand. It was cold and trembling slightly. "We'll figure this out," I said. "Whatever's happening, we'll deal with it together." "You really mean that?" "Of course. You're my wife. We're a team." The relief on her face was heartbreaking. Here she was, caught in a web of her own making, and she still thought I was her ally, that I would help her find a way out of the consequences of her own choices. "I need to make some calls," she said. "Try to figure out who's behind this." She spent the next hour on the phone with lawyers, former colleagues, anyone who might have information about corporate investigations or financial surveillance. I listened from the kitchen while making dinner, marveling at how thoroughly she'd convinced herself that she was the victim in this situation. Around 7, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Julian's name, and Alma answered with desperate eagerness. "Thank God. Are you okay?" "What happened?" I couldn't hear Julian's side of the conversation, but Alma's responses told the story clearly enough. "Ethics violation? But that's impossible. You never... Oh no. What do you mean they had receipts?" "What receipts? The watch?" How could they know about the watch? No, I can't meet you tonight. I told you, my accounts are still frozen. Well, what about your accounts? What do you mean, frozen? The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and by the end of it, Alma looked like she'd aged another 5 years. She hung up and sat staring at her phone with the expression of someone who'd just realized they were standing in quicksand. Bad news? I asked. Julian lost his job, some kind of ethics investigation. They accused him of using company funds for personal expenses. That's terrible. Is it true? I don't know. Maybe. He's been under a lot of stress lately. She was still protecting him even now, still trying to find ways to excuse the inexcusable. What does this mean for you? I asked. I don't know. Julian was helping me with some things. Financial advice, legal research. If he's in trouble, it might complicate my situation. It was fascinating to watch her try to explain their relationship without actually explaining their relationship. She was walking a tightrope between honesty and deception, and she was running out of rope. Maybe you should focus on your own problems first, I suggested. Get your job situation sorted out, then worry about helping Julian. You're right. You're absolutely right. She looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you. We ate dinner in relative quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Alma kept checking her phone, probably hoping for some miracle solution to present itself. I kept thinking about Vanna's timeline, about the carefully orchestrated collapse we'd engineered. After dinner, Alma disappeared upstairs to take a bath and think. I knew she was actually video chatting with Julian, trying to figure out their next move. The monitoring software would capture every word, every plan, every desperate scheme they came up with. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanna. Phase 3 tomorrow. Are you ready? I looked up at the ceiling, where I could hear Alma moving around in our bedroom. Tomorrow, she'd wake up thinking she still had options, still had time to salvage something from the wreckage of her carefully laid plans. She was wrong about that too. I texted back, ready. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others just keep making bigger ones until the consequences become unavoidable. Alma and Julian were definitely in the second category, and tomorrow they were going to discover just how unavoidable those consequences had become. Tuesday morning brought sunshine and the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe anything is possible. Alma seemed more optimistic too, humming while she got dressed and actually eating breakfast, instead of just pushing food around her plate. I have a meeting with a lawyer this morning, she announced. Someone Nadine recommended. He specializes in wrongful termination cases. That's great. I hope he can help. He thinks I have a strong case. Apparently, the company's investigation was rushed and didn't follow proper procedures. I nodded encouragingly, while mentally noting that Alma was about to waste what little money she could access on a lawyer who couldn't possibly win a case built on documented evidence of actual misconduct. What time is your meeting? I asked. 10 o'clock, downtown. I might be gone most of the day. After she left, I called Vanna. She's meeting with David Brennan, Vanna said. Personal injury lawyer, not employment law. He takes cases on contingency because he's desperate for clients. And Julian? Julian is meeting with his own lawyer at 11. Different firm, same building. I thought that was a nice touch. I had to admire the symmetry. Both of them seeking legal salvation in the same building, probably passing each other in the lobby without realizing they were both chasing the same impossible dream. What's the timeline for today? I asked. Alma's meeting will last about an hour. Brennan will take her case because he needs the money, but he'll figure out pretty quickly that it's unwinnable. Julian's meeting will go worse. His lawyer will explain that ethics violations are grounds for termination regardless of the circumstances. And then? Then they'll probably meet for lunch to compare notes and realize they're both completely screwed. Vanna's voice carried a note of satisfaction that I was beginning to recognize. She took genuine pleasure in the precision of her planning, the way all the pieces fit together to create an inevitable outcome. "There's one more thing," she said. "I think it's time for the final revelation." She explained what she had in mind, and I felt that familiar cold satisfaction settle in my chest. It was elegant, devastating, and perfectly timed. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "Completely. They need to understand that their actions have consequences and that some people are smarter than they think they are." After hanging up, I spent the morning working on a legitimate security audit, trying to maintain some semblance of normal life while the final pieces of our plan fell into place. Around noon, I got a text from Alma. "Meeting went well. Lawyer thinks we have options. Will call later." Another lie, but a hopeful one. According to Vanna's contact at the law firm, Brennan had spent most of the meeting explaining why wrongful termination cases were difficult to win and why Alma's case had some significant challenges. At 1 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Julian Rask standing on my front porch, looking like he'd slept in his car. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who'd finally realized the world wasn't going to arrange itself for his convenience. "Corbin," he said, "we need to talk." "Julian, this is unexpected. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and led him into my living room. He looked around with the expression of someone seeing the scene of a crime for the first time, taking in details he'd missed during his previous visit. "Nice place," he said. "Thanks. Coffee?" "No, I'm not here for social calls." Julian sat down heavily on my couch, the same couch where he'd lounged just a week ago, planning his future with my wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What can I do for you?" I asked. "You can stop pretending you don't know what's happening." I sat down across from him, projecting mild confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The accounts, the investigations, the timing of everything, this isn't coincidence." "Julian, you're not making much sense. What investigations?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Someone has been targeting me and Alma, systematically destroying our lives, and I think that someone is you." I had to give him credit for finally recognizing the pattern, even if he was too late to do anything about it. "That's a serious accusation," I said. "What makes you think I would do something like that?" "Because you found out about us." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Julian was finally ready to have an honest conversation, probably because he had nothing left to lose. "Found out about what?" I asked. "About me and Alma, about our relationship." I let the silence stretch out, watching Julian squirm under the weight of his own confession. "Are you saying you're having an affair with my wife?" I asked finally. "We're in love. We have been for months. We were planning to leave our marriages and start over together." "We're planning?" Before someone started sabotaging us, before our accounts got frozen and our jobs disappeared and our whole lives fell apart. Julian's voice was rising, desperation bleeding through his usual composure. He was finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless, and he didn't like it. "Julian," I said gently, "I think you're having some kind of breakdown. You're talking about conspiracies and sabotage, making wild accusations. Maybe you should see someone." "I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were crazy. I said you might need help." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where Julian and I both lived our carefully constructed lives. "Let me ask you something," I said without turning around. "If someone was systematically destroying your life, why would they do it? What would they have to gain?" "Revenge, satisfaction, the chance to make us pay for what we did." "And what did you do?" Another long silence. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We fell in love." I turned around and looked at him, really looked at him. He was a broken man sitting in the ruins of his own making, still trying to find someone else to blame for his choices. "Julian," I said, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "My wife and I have been having some problems lately. Financial stress, work pressure, the usual things that strain a marriage. But we're working through it together, because that's what married people do." But Alma said, "I don't care what Alma said. I care what Alma does. And what she does is come home to me every night, sleep in my bed, and work on fixing our problems instead of running away from them." Julian's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, and finally a dawning understanding of just how thoroughly he'd been played. "You knew," he said. "You knew about everything." "I knew my wife was going through a difficult time. I knew she was making some poor decisions. But I also knew she'd come to her senses eventually." "And you just let it happen?" "I let her make her own choices, and I let those choices have their natural consequences." Julian stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him finally understanding the game we'd been playing, how completely he'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. "You destroyed my life," he said. "No, Julian, you destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't blame anyone else for it." He stood up slowly, his movements those of a much older man. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now? Now you figure out how to live with the consequences of your choices, just like everyone else." Julian walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "Does Alma know about what you did?" I smiled, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I let him see exactly who he'd been dealing with. Alma's about to learn a lot of things she didn't know before, starting with the fact that some gifts can't be returned. After he left, I sat in my living room and waited for Alma to come home. She'd be back soon, probably full of false optimism about her legal options and her future prospects, and then we'd have our own conversation about choices and consequences and the price of betrayal. But first, I had one more call to make. "It's done," I told Vanna when she answered. "How did he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. He finally understands the game, but it's too late to change the outcome." "And Alma?" "Alma's next." The final move was always the hardest one to make, but also the most important. Everything else had been preparation. Everything else had been setting the stage. Now it was time for the curtain to fall. Alma came home at 6:30, and I could tell from the way she walked that her day had gone exactly as Vanna predicted. Her shoulders were slumped, her usual confident stride replaced by the uncertain steps of someone who'd finally run out of options. "How did it go?" I asked. She set down her purse and looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough hope. "Julian came to see you today, didn't he?" "He did." "What did he tell you?" I gestured to the couch, the same place where this had all started with a jewelry box and a badly constructed lie. "Why don't you sit down and we can talk about it?" She sat, but on the edge of the cushion, ready to run if necessary. Some part of her finally understood that she was in danger, even if she couldn't quite identify the source. "He told me you've been having an affair," I said. Alma's face went through the same progression Julian's had: denial, calculation, and finally resignation. "For how long have you known?" she asked. "Since the morning you showed me the jewelry box, the one with the wrong initials." "And you didn't say anything?" "I wanted to see how far you'd go, how elaborate the deception would become." I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder containing all the evidence Vanna and I had compiled. Months of photographs, text messages, financial records, and surveillance data. I wanted to understand exactly who I'd been married to for 8 years. Alma stared at the screen, scrolling through the documentation of her own betrayal. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "You did all this? The accounts, the investigations, destroying our careers?" "I had help," Julian's wife is remarkably resourceful when properly motivated. Vanna Heslor. You should probably thank her, actually. She could have handled this much less elegantly. Alma closed the laptop and looked at me with something that might have been respect. So, what happens now? Now you pack whatever you can carry and leave. Tonight. And if I don't? Then tomorrow morning, copies of this evidence go to your parents, your sister, everyone at your agency, and every marketing firm in the city. Your professional reputation will be destroyed, and your personal life will become a very public spectacle. Alma sat quietly for a moment, processing the reality of her situation. You really hate me, don't you? No, I said, and realized I meant it. I don't hate you. I just don't want to be married to someone who thinks other people exist for their convenience. And Julian? Julian is learning the same lesson you are. That actions have consequences, and some people are smarter than you think they are. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the life she was about to leave behind. I did love you, you know, at the beginning. I know. And I loved you too. But love isn't enough when one person thinks the rules don't apply to them. Alma went upstairs to pack. I heard her moving around, opening drawers, making the kinds of decisions people make when they're reducing their entire life to what fits in a suitcase. She came back down an hour later with 2 bags and the jewelry box that had started everything. I don't suppose there's any chance. No. She nodded, accepting the finality of it. Where will you go? I asked. I don't know. Somewhere I can start over. Good luck with that. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Was any of it real? The marriage? The life we built?